it is these activists in the union form, like it is in the superintendents, like it is in the guidance counselors. It's people who have very little interaction day to day with children that are the biggest spokesman on their quote unquote behalf.
But the question is, how is it that all of these people have become like Marxist lunatics? How did that happen?
I mean, it happened when they took over the unions, probably in the late 70s, early 80s. Where did all the radicals from the 60s go? They went to the colleges and they went to the unions to take them over.
You're the founder of the 1776 Project PAC.
Right.
So, Political Action Committee to do what?
So, in 2021, my godson, all schools were closed. My godson was at school at home, as everybody was, on a Google Classroom, and the teacher started reading a book to him called It Happened in Our Town, about racism. And then she read a book called Race Cars, which was about how policemen only follow black cars, they don't follow white cars, being they only follow black people, not white people. And parents were hugely upset, and they were present in the classroom. And
well, why? They were upset just because the teachers were shoving propaganda down their children's throats? That's no reason to get upset.
Yeah, and this was a third grade class. So my aunt, who's my godson's mother, and other parents reached out to me. I'd helped elect the city council member. We got him involved. It was a whole big to-do. And I said, I wonder how big of an issue this is on a national level. And I said, how about I start a PAC, as I work on campaigns for a living, helping elect conservatives for school board. And we did 58 elections our first year. We won 42. We won another 80 our second year. And so far this year, we've already won 40, and we're not even in the November cycle, where we have another 140 some odd candidates we're supporting. So it's been, I think, one of the best things I've ever done, and certainly the thing that's grown the fastest as far as people being concerned. COVID really opened up a lot of parents' eyes to what's happening in classrooms.
I don't often quote the Bible, but one of the Bible verses that I've been quoting a lot lately is Romans 8:28, which says, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purposes. In other words, all things, including really bad things like COVID, like the COVID lockdown, like that, ultimately led to so much good. So many people woke up that would have not woken up if not for COVID. They saw what their kids were learning. They were horrified, and they said, we need to do something about this. And you step in, and I mean, I have to say, I'm thrilled to hear that you're doing what you're doing. You must have hope for America to be involved at this level.
Yeah, I mean, local politics is not the sexiest politics, but it is what is most involved in everyone's life. I mean, very few people will ever meet the president, but they will most likely meet with their local mayor or their city council or something, or their school board. And I've seen the transformation that could happen. You know, we did in Florida, one of the only politicians whose teams ever reached out to us was Governor DeSantis, and they endorsed candidates, and we endorsed basically the same candidates. And then we flipped Miami-Dade from liberal to conservative. And Miami-Dade is not a small place in any capacity, and the school board just passed a resolution to try to incorporate classics as the new curriculum for Miami-Dade County.
I would faint, except I'm the host of the show. That is so fantastic.
Isn't that amazing?
It's insane.
Yeah, and I think
classics in Miami-Dade County schools.
Yeah, and I called, as someone I talked to, a legislator in North Dakota, I said, if Miami-Dade is doing this in there, why aren't you doing this? And they all said, I just never thought of it before. I didn't think we could do it. I think that for so long, conservatives have been obsessed with school choice. I'm not against school choice or vouchers or anything, but most kids go to public school. Rural kids especially only go to public school because there's not a lot of options available to them. We can't give up on public education. We can't give up on curriculum. And we need fighters in these local spheres who sit there and take this battle on, and they are the ones most invested.
How did Marxist lunatics get control of the educational establishment in America? How did that happen?
You know, it's so funny because in 1949, the National Education Association voted to kick out every registered communist out of the teaching profession in the United States. And there was a dramatic transformation over the ensuing several decades. The biggest thing was colleges was a big part of it because it's the accreditation program and it's the teacher training program. And more than the teacher training program, it's the superintendent's training training program. Most superintendents, or large portions of superintendents, are never teachers. They go in to learn how to manage schools, and superintendents also go to very fancy conferences where tech companies and activists sit there and tell them, this is, or if they're activists themselves, they'll find other activists, will sit them and tell them, here's how you need to hire a DEI officer to search for racism and expunge it every which way. If your job is to find racism, you're going to find racism no matter where it is, or gender nonconformity, or whatever the case may be. Or here's a social experiment on getting rid of phonics out of classrooms, which many schools did in the early 2000s, simply because George Bush liked it. A lot of activists on the left were like, no, well, he likes it, so it must be bad. And a lot of social experiments were done on children over this time. But it really started in the colleges. But that doesn't mean that local governments can't push back on it, because school boards hold the power of the purse. And that creates a lot, and they hire and fire the superintendent in most cases.
This brings up the larger issue, really, of, I wrote a book called If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And I don't mention If You Can Keep It so that people will buy copies, although I hope they do. But I mentioned it because it was the first time that I myself, in writing If You Can Keep It, saw what makes America and how we have, in the last roughly 50 years, drifted away from the founders' vision. Something happened so that, what I'm getting at is that there was a time when most Americans understood they needed to be involved, that freedom is not free, and that even in my own town, I have to invest a little bit. That self-government means we all have to do a little bit to govern ourselves. And something happened in the last 50 or so years where we've drifted from that. I mean, the signal moment, when George Bush after 9/11 said, everybody just, go shopping.
Right.
That's when you realize, whoa, we've kind of slipped here.
Yeah, well, there's two big books that made me, Bowling Alone talks about this, about the complete destruction of social trust and social and participation in almost every facet of society. And then Christopher Caldwell's Age of Entitlement. I mean, they both very much focus on this. And I think it's very easy to sit there and watch television or go on social media to complain. It's very difficult or annoying to go to a meeting.
Right.
But it is the parents' revolution of 2021 that helped elect Governor Youngkin. There's no question about it.
Oh my gosh!
And
we're gonna go to a break, folks. I'm talking to Ryan Girdusky. What is a website where people can find you?
1776 Project PAC, PACPAC.com.
I guess the point I'm making or hoping to make is that I think that used to be normative. I think there was a time when people took more pride locally, pride in their small towns, pride in their communities. They were involved. And something happened, and I guess part of it has to do with the rise of the mass media, that things become more and more national and less local, and we're focused on what's happening nationally because we turn on the TV and it's covering what's happening nationally. But there's been this drift, and so in a sense, you create a vacuum. And then the bad guys win because they get involved.
The ones actually active to show up, and it takes a very, very... School boards are often decided by 8% of the election. So electorates. So if few people show up, my whole election model was, well, if I can just get Republicans to show up and make it 11%, we could win. It's not hard. And we won our first year. We won in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, a place that hasn't voted for Republicans on a presidential election since 1984. We won inside Kansas, or the suburbs of Kansas City, which has been trending left for a very long time. We won countywide in Colorado in some places. So it's not impossible, because this is not presidential election turnout. And this November, Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Kansas all have these elections. So, Pennsylvania doesn't have a big election. It's the state Supreme Court race and your city council race. You may not be that well informed on either which one, but not city council, a school board. But go out for your school board candidates. It is important, and it is partisan. Virginia has a state legislature, but they also have school boards in every area. So you'll never even know how, and they're not, these district lines are not overlapping. So you never know how you can really affect change unless you just show up and look for who these people are.
Well, so this is interesting because I think part of it also is that the left has gotten so insane that your average American who in the past would have said, well, I'm Democrat, or, my parents voted for FDR and I thought Clinton was okay, or whatever it is, they now realize that they are being represented by lunatics who are anti-reality. And
Yeah.
that anti-reality propaganda is being forced on their children. So at that point, it's not difficult to side with reality and sanity.
Right.
But the problem is people have to actually do it.
Well, the problems are twofold. One is that college-educated white voters have been moving to the left, and they vote the most often out of any demographic group, so at all in the whole nation. So we have to counter that by having people show up that don't always show up to a vote. And secondly, is we cannot therefore be, and I tell this to candidates all the time, you have to speak to the realities of your district, of where you are running. Don't hear a national story that happened in Hawaii or somewhere else and say, this is what's happening in my local school board, when it's not, because then they won't trust you. Speak to what is actually happening where you are, be informed on the issues, and speak to the overall vision of what you want something to become. If you were in charge of a school board or a mayor or whoever you're running for, what do you want it to look like in 10 years? Where are we going? What is the vision? It's so much larger than just culture war issues are important, but there has to be vision attached to it. Where do you want us to be? Where are you taking us? And I think that is so important and informative when it comes to electing candidates and to running for office.
But I think, I guess part of me is, genuinely shocked that pornographic or almost pornographic or gay pornographic material has found its way into schools, into school libraries. I mean, that's genuinely shocking to me. It's one thing, to have crazy people here and there, but when you hear that there are people advocating putting this stuff in our children's classrooms and in their school libraries, I think to most people it really is shocking.
Because
you can't believe that could happen.
They're not running on let's put pornographic thing in. What they're doing, and it's been incredibly effective, sadly, is saying they're book banners. And that label has been really hurting a lot of conservative candidates. And what the question has to be is, I'm not for banning books, but are you for pornography in the
I'm for
classroom?
banning books in a kid's school, but that's the whole point. In other words, the reason that these people aren't on the side of the truth and goodness is because they lie.
Right.
They misrepresent the truth. Nobody's for banning books. We're not talking about Lady Chatterley's Lover, should it be published? We're not talking about should Ulysses be published in 1938. We're talking about schools. We're talking about schools that have little kids or young people being exposed to things. And look, let's get to the basics. It is utterly up to the parents of what their kids can see and not see. And people who are professional educators, many times, they don't get that anymore. They don't think it's in loco parentis. They think we're the professionals, you're the parents, you shut up, and we'll tell you what to teach your kids.
I think it's also a disassociation even between what some teachers want. I don't think a lot of teachers want this. I think a lot of teachers are afraid of their unions. A lot of them are afraid of I have so many teachers who come to me and say, I would love to speak up, but I'm genuinely afraid of my union. One teacher who I know very well said that he will not even answer a poll question on the phone, honestly, because he's afraid that his union might find out that he answered a poll question.
So when did the unions give themselves over to the devil? Like, when did that happen, that teachers' unions became ideological beehives?
Well, teachers' unions, I mean, it's so funny because people assume teachers' unions are the thing of children when teachers' unions are for adults. As teachers' unions have become more and more radicalized, I think the most shocking thing that we saw, besides them openly endorsing CRT, besides Randy Weingartner and making an embarrassment for herself each and every day, is, remember during COVID, the LA Teachers Union said they would not start reopening schools until they defunded the police. They became not only advocacies of left-wing politics, but extreme radical left-wing politics, hand in hand with it. And at no point did children enter the equation whatsoever. And you can see this in the immense learning loss. The only group of schools that did well under COVID, or relatively well, were Catholic schools because they were open. And I think that speaks volumes when you look at what the teachers union is doing. Teachers unions often stifle innovation. They are combative of any Republican politician. They bend over backwards, and they're only there for their own contracts. I'm not saying that teachers should. Every teacher's bad. A lot of teachers are great. Most teachers are great, but it is these activists in the union form, like it is in the superintendents, like it is in the guidance counselors. It's people who have very little interaction day to day with children that are the biggest spokesman on their quote unquote behalf.
But the question is, how is it that all of these people have become like Marxist lunatics? How did that happen?
I mean, it happened when they took over the unions, probably in the late 70s, early 80s. Where did all the radicals from the 60s go? They went to the colleges and they went to the unions to take them over. And conservatives, I mean, they fought.
This is the long march to the institutions.
And they did it. I mean,
and this was a plan.
That 100% was a plan. They talk about this. Christopher Rufo in his book talks about how they did this. And it was decades in the making, but it finally came to fruition. And there's nothing to counter it with as far as that goes. I think the thing that conservatives are waking up to is we have to use the institution of government. We have to use the power of government to sit there and to fight these fights over. One thing that is the upcoming battle in education that no one's talking about yet is over technology in the classroom. Most people, what most school boards do is they go to Silicon Valley vendors and they say, what do you have for reading, math, this thing, that thing? And they show them what's for sale, rather than demanding that they meet certain contractual agreements for those areas and sit there and say, well, we're looking for this. And it can't include CRT, and it can't include gender stuff, and it can't include all this other stuff. But 92%, I think it was reported in the Hill, 92% of all tech companies in classrooms sell kids' data to third-party vendors. It's a tremendous money boom inside the classrooms that technology companies are doing. And unlike textbooks, which have tremendous oversight, there is not nearly as much oversight in the tech sector whatsoever.
This is sickening. So how do we combat that piece of it?
You take over the school boards. School boards are democratically elected, and they are in charge of purchasing the technology for the school districts. All contracts go through the school boards. So little by little, in districts that we won, in Tarrant County, Texas, we've done things like the banning of, biological men in girls' bathrooms and girls' spaces. We did parents' bills of rights in places in Kansas that we won. We did elections in Virginia and in Ohio that expanded choice. I think now in Oklahoma, we helped Ryan Walters get elected, and they're trying to do now vouchers for Christian schools. Things are possible, and things are opening up as you elect more and more of these people who are in on the ground level, and they are to sit there and not only just do these culture war things, but say, how do we get kids reading more? How do we get them doing math more proficiently? Those are also very important issues.
And when are they going to start studying the classics?
Yeah, hopefully very soon. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a whole nation of classic curriculum?
That would be...
And Miami-Dade, of all places, can lead the
Wow.
way. It's time that Republican legislators start leading the way on curriculum as well.
I want them to make Greek, Latin, and Linear B mandatory languages. No, I have to say, it is really, it's astounding that this is happening and that you and others are at the forefront of this, because it wouldn't have happened if not for COVID. It's just funny to me that it woke so many people up, as I said a few minutes ago, and that you're doing it. So what is your sense of the scope of this? In other words, what is your sense that of where this is going and the hope for America in general? Because it seems rather like a grand vision.
I mean, it is. I mean, there is, over 20,000 school districts in America. Some are county-wide, some are very, very small. We've done just a few hundred of them, but those few hundred represent a million children. So what I would like to do as a whole plan right now is we're going to open up another component where we're going to advocate for policy changes as well. Electing the right people is good, but then oftentimes once they're elected, they'll say, now, where do I go to find a good superintendent? Where do I go to get this bill done? What do I have this power for? And we're kind of like, well, we just do the election part of it. And they're finding it out, and they're doing it on their own. They're doing a great job in most cases. But I think we as conservatives, what we so often lack, we have great mantras and we have great things that we can sit there and rally behind, but oftentimes we don't have goals in mind. And I think Goals need to be set on how do we bring classical curriculum back in the classroom? How do we bring phonics back in every classroom? How do we get reading levels up? How do we get math levels up? In Mississippi, you want to hear some good news? Mississippi had a superintendent a couple of years ago, and she made a new rule. If you could not read at a 3rd grade level, you could not go to 4th grade, no excuses. Now, she did a bunch of programs for early intervention and for kids who had learning dysfunctions and all the rest of it, but the teachers union, they bitched and they moaned. They said this is racist and black kids are going to be left behind. And, they always throw, children out and sit there and say they'll be victims of your policy. And she said, no, this is the rule. Mississippi went in reading for 3rd graders. It went from number 49 in the country to number 21 in a 5-year period. Once the standard was you cannot just pass kids along who cannot read, because by the time they get to a 7th grade level, if they can't read, they can't read. It's almost hopeless at that point. So I think we're looking at these laboratories of democracy. We're looking at where school districts are getting it right, and I think now it's trying to copy it and look for a set of principles and curriculum and goals that we can copy everywhere.
It is amazing to me, really, to think that this is going on all around the country and that you've been successful. Are there other people doing this? I mean, when did people wake up that it was a school board thing? It seems to me that the moment with Terry McAuliffe making his idiotic statement really woke up the whole country.
Yeah, and it's not just a school board thing, it's an everything thing. But
Right.
School boards are where you can do the most. Only 8 to 10% of people vote. Your vote matters so much more if you just show up to these school board elections. And if you go to 1776projectpac.com or 1776projectpac on all our social media on every platform, we advertise these candidates that are really good on the issues, that have sat there and they're going to sit there and fight on behalf of children and parents and good teachers. And I think that it's people are always looking for how can I make a difference, and you feel so small sometimes, especially when you're dealing with national and big issues. And this is where you really can. And this November, you don't have to wait till 2024 to do anything. This is happening in 7 weeks, 8 weeks. So show up in the next 8 weeks and go out and vote in your local school board election, and you can have a transformational effect. We've seen so much positive, and every school district, whether it be small or large, represents tens of thousands of children who don't have a voice in a democracy and are being sometimes inflicted on these ideas, and they are being experimented on in terms of policy and promoting anti-Americanism. So that's how you can make a difference, is go and vote for your local school board.
And I say to folks out there, if you can do this, I want you to think about all the people who can't do this. Parents that are so busy, working so hard, they can't even think about this. If you have the bandwidth to do this, do it for them. Do it for their kids, because maybe your kids come home to a home where these ideas get washed away by the sanity of your family, but a lot of kids don't. And so this is something that if you can get involved, whether in running or in getting other people to vote and putting this information out there on social media, folks, we have an obligation. This is about saving our country, and it's not just our country, it's the whole world, because there's only one America.